There are games that really stick with you, especially when they sink their claws into you at a formative age. Games you play over and over, which become beloved friends. One of the best examples of this for me is Skies of Arcadia, a Dreamcast game later remade for the GameCube, which is the version I played as a young teen. Set in a world of airships and exploration, Skies of Arcadia boasts well-drawn characters, sharp dialogue, really cool ship combat, and a world that's a real pleasure to explore. It does look a bit dated now, especially in the extremely annoying random encounters on the overworld and some really repetitive dungeons. But there are still a lot of brilliant ideas here, and a lot to learn. There's potentially a lot to explore here, so to speak, but I particularly want to think about this world, and how the player encounters it. Here's a nice sweeping statement. Every fantasy world, to some extent, recreates the real world. This is by no means a bad thing. After all, we live in the real world, most of the time. So it's much easier to imagine something that's only a few steps removed from it, than to imagine something wildly different. There's a reason why media about travelling to different multiverses usually doesn't spend most of its time in universes where everyone is made of paint or has hot dog fingers. This is doubly so for a tabletop RPG, because it's not just the DM's imagination in play, but the players as well. So it makes sense to do something that looks like the world we recognise on some level, because that helps your players ease themselves in. In Skies of Arcadia, we have different continents, different parts of the world separated out by what moon they're under, which look very much like the real world around the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. Not so much geographically, but certainly culturally. We're even told in the opening that Arcadia is in an age of exploration, which in itself suggests an analogue to real world history. So we've got Nasser under the Red Moon, which is a vaguely North African/Arabian desert society, Yafutoma under the Blue Moon, which is a very obvious analogue for East Asia, and Ixotaka under the Green Moon, which is a jungle-based society vaguely reminiscent of Central Africa, Central America, and the Amazon. But even just from that vague description, you might be able to see some of the dangers of this approach. To put it simply, Ixotaka in particular feels like a racist stereotype at times. And the fact that it blends together various different cultures from the real world does it no favours in that regard. I don't think there's any conscious malice, particularly as the Valuan occupiers clearly stand in for European colonialism, but it's so broadly drawn that it feels like a 19th century Punch cartoon at times. But in a way, the probable lack of conscious intent is exactly the point. The insidious thing about racism, like other forms of bigotry, is that it infects your mind and the culture around you, such that you end up replicating it without meaning to, without any awareness of what you're doing, unless you try very hard not to do that. So, always be wary of this. If you want to draw on a real-world culture, try to use details rather than vague, broad strokes. Maybe elements of the language, for instance, or artistic styles, or otherwise engaging with that culture. If you can draw on the expertise of someone from that culture, so much the better. Another related thing to be wary of here is Eurocentrism. While, as mentioned, the antagonist nation of Valua clearly stands in for Western Europe, it's worth noting that most settlements we see that aren't affiliated with any of the nations also look pretty European in their design. There's an underlying assumption here which suggests that Western Europe is the norm, and the other nations are deviations from that. It's not so much an issue with Skies of Arcadia, which is clearly drawing on the iconography of early 18th century piracy, and so ends up settling itself in that cultural milieu pretty naturally. But it is something to be careful of. The idea that white European is the default is an underlying assumption of a lot of Western culture. So much so that it's ended up in a surprising amount of Japanese media as well. This is not the place for a discussion of why that might be. It's just something to be aware of, and to try to avoid if you can. For instance, I really like setting adventures, especially starting adventures, in port cities, because you immediately get a cultural melting pot, where people from all over are naturally all going to look and act differently to each other. And so you get a sense of a wide world, where there is no default. But it's worth bearing in mind as you go, in terms of describing skin culture, architectural style, maybe accents. Just make sure there's plenty of variation. All of this is more to send a note of caution, rather than to get you to uproot everything. Your world is your world, and it's going to reflect your background and preoccupations. And that's fine. It's your fantasy, that's as it should be. But it's a shared fantasy with your players, and you need to always be aware of that, especially if any of them are from a different ethnic or cultural background to you. Besides that, I just generally think that the more culturally diverse a world is, the richer it is to experience. This goes for things like sexuality and gender as well, of course. Sometimes questioning your assumptions about how something or someone should look or act will lead you to a much more interesting outcome, and give you and your players a more fun and valuable experience. And that's really what it's all about. Obviously, this is a huge topic, and I'm not exactly the person most qualified to talk about it. So I've put some links in the description to pieces, mostly by people of colour, on the importance of being aware of stereotyping and Eurocentrism in creating your world. Things that have made me think and evaluate the way I go about world building. Do give them a read, and keep them in the back of your mind as you go. Everyone who's played games a lot, especially if they grew up with them, has treasured gaming memories of an experience that really cut through to the heart of them. These are exactly the kinds of things you want to recreate in a role-playing game, of course. The things that the players will be telling stories about for years to come. The things that excite their emotions. One of my treasured gaming memories comes about halfway through Skies of Arcadia, after main character Vice and company have broken out of a Valuan prison and find themselves, unexpectedly, in charge of a ship, the DELFINus. The game has been building to this for a while. The game's manual and in-game tutorials have been promising you your own ship all along, but it's still an overwhelming experience. Especially as the DelFEEnus is, compared to everything else you've encountered up to that point, absolutely huge and state-of-the-art. I still remember walking around the ship for the first time, a huge smile plastered on my face, getting to grips with the fact that this was mine. That I would get to outfit this ship and recruit a crew. I like a lot of things about Skies of Arcadia, but I think this might be the best thing about it. Giving you something within the world that is fully your own, as well as a customizable base slightly later in the game, which comes to genuinely feel like home. It gives you a place in the world which you can control, which is reflected in how NPCs treat you, and even just in how you get around. And this, of course, is a great thing to replicate in a role-playing game, where you as DM control the world, where the world is dynamic and evolving in the moment, not pre-programmed. Hence my advice, which you've already gleaned from the title of this segment: give your party a ship. It can work with lots of other things as well that give the players a place in the world, a stronghold, a business that they run, even a home village. But a ship is a particularly fun one, because it gives the players lots to think about in terms of different roles in the ship, possibly recruiting extra crew members, keeping the ship maintained, navigation, all sorts of complicated factors that create verisimilitude and give them plenty to keep track of. But most of all, it's symbolic. If you give your players a ship, you're giving them permission to wander around and discover things. Even if you're not running a sandbox game, and even if the players stick to a fairly predetermined path, what you're doing is handing them control over their own destinies. What's more, you're giving them a stake and a place in the world, a kind of identity. Maybe word gets around about these misfit weirdos doing their Our Flag Means Death tribute around the high seas. Of course, that word can be good or bad. The idea of a game having a moral choice or alignment system is kind of old hat these days. Too many games treat it as a binary, giving you a good ending or an evil ending, depending on choices, or sometimes just on one choice. I've already talked about ways of nuancing alignment and morality in my Fire Emblem video, but here I want to talk about something related but different. Skies of Arcadia gives you, or rather Vice, something called a swashbuckler rating. It's essentially a measure of how well regarded you are, and ticks up or down based on certain dialogue choices, and how often you run away from battle. It's simple enough, but one of the things that makes it interesting is that the rating itself in numerical terms is hidden from the player. The only manifestation of it is in Vice's current title, visible on the wanted board or in his stats, and in dialogue with a few NPCs. Every time I've played the game, I find myself compulsively checking the title on the stats screen every time I do anything significant. It's so simple, but it's oddly addictive and satisfying to watch various adjectives get appended to Vice's name as his career progresses. The DM's Guide has something kind of similar here in its faction reputation mechanic, which I'll talk more about in my next video, sizzle sizzle, but I'm more interested in a kind of overall generalised reputation. How might the general citizenry react to your party? And how might that be different from big power players? How much has word spread of their exploits, and what word might that be? How do their actions reflect upon them? This can and should differ from place to place, of course, but what is the general feeling or impression of the party among people they've never met? Now, you may have noticed that this is quite an abstract thing. Unlike with factional reputation, it doesn't necessarily come with mechanical benefits or any obvious advantage. But it's very easy to whip some up, even on the fly. Maybe your party gets discounts in shops and taverns based on their reputation, or DCs for persuasion checks get a little lower on average. Or the opposite, if they've got a bad reputation. In my current Dragon Heist campaign, I've been using the party's reputation as a modifier when they roll to establish the weekly profits of their tavern, taking into account promotion they've done for the tavern and their general activities around town. It's simple, but that simplicity makes it easy to keep track of, and it's an easy way of giving the player's actions consequences. One of the beauties of doing something like this is that you as the DM can use it to mess with the players, in a respectful and productive way, of course, if they get really invested in their reputation. At a certain point in Skies of Arcadia Legends, the remade version, Vice's title changes to Vice the Fallen Pirate, because false rumours have spread of him attacking civilians and generally doing dastardly deeds. It feels surprisingly frustrating and unfair, especially as there's nothing you can do about it for some time, until eventually an imposter turns up and defeating them restores your reputation. So maybe some rival or antagonist of the party can spread rumours about them doing terrible things, giving them an immediate quest to trace these rumours to the source, and also putting an impediment in the way, especially if they've been used to easy treatment from NPCs. It's yet another way of maintaining the sense of a dynamic world. Not only does the world respond to the players, but they must respond right back to keep things the way they want them. Skies of Arcadia kind of feels like a D&D campaign, in an odd sort of way. There's a big, globe-trotting quest to avert disaster, with plenty of memorable NPCs along the way, but more fundamentally, the player is encouraged to explore the world, to find strange things that have never before been discovered, and they're given freedom to explore. Eventually, you even get to fly around without random encounters. Thank Christ! And there's a sense that the world is fully open and available to you. That's an amazing feeling, and something that's really worth trying to capture in a D&D game. Thanks for watching. Unlike previous videos where I've been talking about very well-known games and series, this is a double labour of love for me. Not only giving out some ideas and advice for D&D, but also spreading the word of a game I really love that not enough people have played. It's probably not the easiest to track down these days, but I really do recommend it. I've been replaying it while making this video, almost 2 decades after playing it for the first time, and it really does hold up. If you enjoyed this video, or indeed just want to show your appreciation for this great game, do leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more like this one. There's at least one video in the works on a series I consider to be really underrated, and one that is not unlike Skies of Arcadia in some ways. Until next time, goodbye, friends.